As you know, on Sunday night or Monday morning of every week, we post a new expository semiotics explaining why we would choose which lectionary readings. But in these readings, our dream is, and our desire is, to help you read the signs and fondle the details and spot the seminal metaphors, the condensed signs and the stories that are key for preaching to a digital culture. So strap on your seatbelt and join us as we prospect our passages for today. Welcome to the LenTalk for August 6th, 2023. This is the day I kind of tremble when I even think about it. August 6th, 1945, when the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And 70,000 people were immediately eviscerated. So begin this LenTalk with a little repentance here and reminder that we live in a very dangerous world, and a world that is needing more than ever the life and the light of Jesus, which is our focus for today. We're going to look at in all the lectionary passages, I want to do the most familiar one, Matthew 14:13 to 21. This is called the, quote, feeding of the 5,000. Now, that's a misnomer because it's 5,000 men, so we're talking about really the feeding of the 10, 15,000. And I want to, as we look at this, I want to have a little fun with you and everything we do. Let me just start with it. Everything we do ought to be out of a spirit of joy, overflowing joy, festive joy. And I was reminded of that. There's a young Spanish Carmelite priest who died on the 15th of July with bone cancer. Before he died, he penned a very strange request for those who were conducting his funeral. His name was Pablo Maria de la Cruz. And he asked for a facial scanner to be installed at the chapel where his funeral was to be held. And these were his written instructions to those presiding at his funeral. He explained why a facial scanner. Only those who are joyful will be let in. I want you to be joyful. And no black either. It's very hot. And he said that he wanted this facial scanner to only let in people that were smiling and joyful, because he wanted his funeral, quote, to be a party at the banquet of the wedding feast of the Lamb. Isn't that wonderful? I just love that. A facial scanner to let you in. Maybe we ought to do that for church. You know, you can't get to church unless you got the joy of the Lord is your strength. The joy? Where's the joy? Too many people who come to church looking, they were born in crabapple season. And I'm right now under this big, huge crabapple tree, which reminds me of that. But I don't want to minimize the need for mourning. I think this culture does not know how to deal with mourning properly. And there's a book of Lamentations for a reason. But wherever Jesus went, there was joy and eating. Jesus is a foodie. And even, there's an old story that wherever Paul went, there was either a revival or a riot. Well, wherever Jesus went, there was joy and food. And Paul's great passage on joy himself, maybe arguably one of the greatest statements on joy ever written. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say, rejoice. And he goes on here about the peace that passes understanding. Where is he writing this from? Prison. Philippians. He's writing it from prison. So the kind of joy we're talking about here transcends whatever state you're in. I mean, as this Carmelite priest mentioned and witnessed in his own life. He's dying, but he wants there to be joy present. So we're gonna look at this feeding story, this food story. Again, wherever Jesus was, there's this festive joy story. And I want us to read it as a story. Now, that's what we're always trying to do every week here. And I thank you for supporting these LenTalks and for subscribing and for supporting this ministry that gets these LenTalks to you every week. But how do you read the Bible? Do you read it? We're trying to help you to read it as a story. We've learned how to read it as a text. But how do you read it as a story? And so if you read it as a story, you got to turn it into a motion picture in your mind. So you got to see the feeding of this crowd. You ready? You got to see the fish. You ready? You got to see the bread. So we got 5 loaves, 2 fishes. Those little loaves and fish feed over 10,000 people. But have you ever asked the question? The Bible actually tells us, I think it's in John, but there were barley loaves, but doesn't tell us what kind of fish. So do you know what a barley loaf looks like? And what kind of fish might it have been? And how did they eat the loaves and this raw fish? When it says they ate it, how can you picture them eating it? How did they eat it? How would they have eaten it? Well, when you ask the question what kind of fish it was most likely tilapia. Now, tilapia is a small freshwater fish that's really a staple in Mediterranean cuisine. We know it today by St. Peter's fish. But remember, this is fish. This is a little fish. How did they just put it in their mouth and chew it like this? I mean, is this one of the first forms of sushi in the Mediterranean world? We know there's sushi going on in Asian cultures, but now, even though we don't have definitive answers to these questions, this is what you do when you're reading it as a story. What kind of bread was it? Well, it says barley loaves, so it was barley, and this is the most common type of bread in the region at the time because it was for the poor. The people could afford it. They couldn't afford some of the wheat, so they made loaves out of barley. And so to understand the story, we've got to understand the power of the staple fish, which was the earliest symbol, by the way, of the Christians, these Jesus followers, the ichthus. And we've got the whole issue of bread. And why is bread such a significant statement in the whole story? From Genesis to the maps, you find bread over and over again. The whole story of Joseph being sold into slavery was so he could feed bread to his family and to the world, because the whole world's buying from him. And there's this unique thing. The key to the breads thing here is bread. You just got a tiny little bit of material. You got a little, barley that's ground into this kind of flour, and you add some water, and from the Egyptians we got the yeast. But this little tiny material, when you add air. Now, in Greek, the word for air, spirit, and wind is the same, pneuma. So when you add the pneuma, suddenly you got an overflowing pan of bread that can feed a lot of people from this little bit of material. In other words, little can be much if God is in it. Add this wind of the Spirit. Add the Spirit. Add the air. And miracles can happen. Now, bread is also important because Hebrews love their bread. Remember, they pined for it in the wilderness. God's giving them manna every day. And yet they wanted bread, and they loved their bread. And there's a reason for it, because the Egyptians were known for their bread. The ancient Egyptians were some of the most skilled people in the history of the world at making bread. And they are the ones that pioneered the yeast. And yeast is a living organism that produces carbon dioxide gas, which causes the dough to rise. And this gives leavened bread. It's light and fluffy texture when you add the air to it. The ancient Egyptians also developed a lot of different types of bread: flatbreads, loaves, rolls. They made bread with a lot of different ingredients: wheat, barley, spelt, emmer. And as one of the first cultures in history to develop leavened bread, they developed all sorts of kinds of leavened bread that we are still eating today. By the way, this leavened bread also the Egyptians used to offer sacrifices to their gods. And so today we're still enjoying the benefit of these ancient Egyptians, innovators with bread. I mean, do you like pita bread? Do you like naan bread? I love naan bread. Do you like challah bread? Well, you can thank the Egyptians. These were recipes that ancient Egyptians developed. And no wonder the Hebrews, where's the bread? We missed the bread. And it's helpful to remember that the word company, panera, means bread, pan. Come and pan, P-A-N-E, breaking bread together, come means together. And so companion are those who break bread together. Company are people who break bread together. It's not a company until you break bread together. So you got the Jesus company, the Jesus with his companions who break bread and eat bread and the best bread. And companion really means the one who brings the bread along. And Jesus is that for us. Now, how did the crowd eat the fish and the bread? And we don't really know. How did they? Usually the fish was grilled, baked, or fried in Jesus' day. And maybe, remember Mark's account of this story, they talk about putting them together in groups of 50 or 100. And usually, a lot of the times, this fish was also made into a stew. And so maybe that's where they did the stew. We don't know. But you just can't see them just taking a piece of fish and eating it like that, the head and all. So we don't know what happened, but these are the kinds of, God gave you an imagination for a reason, so use it. Until you imagine how in the world did this happen. Now, the key to the story is, number one, Jesus says to the crowd, and there's another LenTalk where I spent a lot of time on this, you sit down. In other words, you got to trust me enough to feed you, because if you stand up, you can still go and buy some bread, some food for yourself. So you got to trust me enough to sit down. And he only fed those who sat down. The disciples only fed. He told his disciples, I'm going to bless it, but you're going to feed them. Jesus is not going to do for us what we can do for ourselves. So, and plus he's training his disciples here to do as he did. So he blessed these 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, gave it to his disciples and said, you feed them. And then, here's what I really want to focus on today. There are all these leftovers. And there is a biblical tradition of overflowing. God doesn't just feed us enough to eke out our existence on a daily basis. My grandma had this, I have had an ample sufficiency is how she'd put it. Doesn't mean my stomach is bloated and my belly's full, but I've had an ample sufficiency. And God provides us, thank you, Grandma Boggs, for an ample sufficiency every day. Give us this day our daily. It doesn't mean just what we need just to get by. It means more than enough. An ample sufficiency, more than enough. So we have a God of abundance, more than enough. But even that more than enough means there are going to be leftovers. So what do you do with the leftovers? Well, this text says you put them in baskets. And let me just read to you exactly what it says. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds, and all ate and were filled. And they took up what was left over of the broken pieces. 12 baskets full. They took up what was left over of the broken pieces, put them in the baskets, and there were 12 baskets left over. Now that raises a question about the baskets. Can you picture the baskets? What did the baskets look like? How big were the baskets? And why were there 12? Well, we do have an issue here. There were 12 disciples that distributed, and so we have 12 baskets of leftovers left behind. What happened to those baskets of leftovers? And one of two things had to happen. Either Jesus gave a basket to each one of the 12, and that's when they went then and got into the boat, and that's when Jesus sent them off, made them go off to the other side of the lake, and he himself then did kind of a shortcut, was going to walk on the water to get past them, and then you have all those walk on the water stories. But can you imagine those disciples with 12 big baskets of fish and leftover bread and trying to get them all in the boat? Could have happened that way. Most biblical scholars think that is probably what happened. I happen to think that Jesus dismissed his disciples, sent them off in the boat, because he said he wanted to go back and dismiss the crowd. And this is where I think Jesus went back to the crowd to teach them what I call a theology of leftovers. That I'm giving you more than enough. But you don't hoard your leftovers. You take this and you use these baskets to feed a hungry world. There's more than enough, but there's more than enough for you, not so you can build bigger barns, not so you can hoard it, but so you can feed a hungry world. Now, baskets. So we immediately then think, okay, what are some baskets in the Bible? Where do you find baskets? Where do you encounter baskets in the Bible? Well, you got the basket Moses was placed in the bulrushes. One of the most powerful sermons I'll never forget in my life is bulrushes or burning bushes, the two ways of coming to faith. Which will it be, bulrushes or burning bushes? Baskets, actually the word used to describe Noah's Ark. They got collected, all of the samples of everything that existed and put them in this big basket. The baskets of manna in the wilderness that fed the Hebrews for a week. Jesus, the bread of life, placed in a basket. We called it manger. And was born in this straw basket. Remember, Paul escaped from Damascus in a basket. I could go on and on. The point is that leftovers, remnants, have always been placed in and collected in baskets. Even very early on, since ancient times, baskets were used to rescue and transport the wounded from battle. We have as early as the Battle of Kadesh, 1274 BC. The Egyptian army used baskets to transport their wounded soldiers back to their camp. And you find this depicted in a relief from the Temple of Ramses II at Karnak. And so they would take the wounded from the battlefields, put them in the baskets. In other words, these were the original, that phrase, basket cases. Some people were basket cases. The Romans used baskets to transport their wounded soldiers on the backs of mules. And even those who were not wounded, but just exhausted from battle, they would put in baskets and relieve them and get them out of harm's way. And this is described by the Roman historian Livy in his account of the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, book 22 of his history. The passage reads, "And those who were unwounded, but were exhausted by the heat and thirst, and by the long and heavy fighting, were carried off in baskets on the backs of mules or in carts." Again, hence the phrase basket case. But basket cases were those who were rescued and removed to safety in a basket, whether they were wounded or winded, whether they were just maimed or exhausted or just grimy. They would carry them away. And we still collect our dirty clothes in dirty clothes baskets. So a basket here has, and the word basket case, you ever been called a basket case? I have. Archaeological evidence, ancient battlefields. Baskets have been found at the site of the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC, the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC. Now you've got other methods used to transport people as well, the wounded and the limbless during battles in ancient times. You got the Greeks used stretchers, the Romans used biers. But baskets, the most common means of transporting the wounded during the ancient battles, the wounded and the exhausted. And even today, search and rescue parties, when somebody's hanging and maimed and injured on a cliff, they put down the baskets. You got the baskets that rescue people from mountainsides and cliffs. So here we have the leftovers, broken pieces, put into these 12 baskets. Now, what kind of baskets were there? In Jesus' day, there were two kinds of baskets. There were kophinos and spheros. And the kophinos was a small round basket made of woven reeds or rushes that could hold about 2 gallons of food. The spheros was a larger rectangular basket made of woven reeds or rushes that could hold about 4 gallons of food. So you multiply 12 baskets full, whether it was a spheros or a kophinos, you got between 24 and 48 gallons of leftover food. You got either 1,200 loaves of leftovers or 2,400 loaves of leftover bread. And this is where Jesus comes in, the bread of life. It's not just Jesus came to feed us bread, but he becomes the bread. Remember, some of Jesus' followers thought he came to give bread to them, like Moses in the wilderness, in the desert. You seek me for the loaves and fishes, he said. But he is himself the bread of life. He came to be bread for us. And we are, he said, I am the bread of life, and we are called to feed others with that bread of life. He is the bread. Yes, you're going to need this kind of bread from wheat or barley or whatever, but some grain, but the ultimate staff of life, The very stuff of existence is Jesus. And as we feed others the bread of life, we are fed. I can't say that enough. As we ourselves feed others, we are fed. So when Jesus calls the disciples to gather up the fragments, that none may be lost, that's John 6:12's account of this story. Gather up the fragments, that none may be lost. He's pointing beyond breads and baskets here. And he's pointing to the whole people of God. He's signing the kingdom, the church, where none be left behind. There will be none that should be disparaged or ignored. Where none, let none be lost. Gather them all up. All the fragments. Bring them all. The broken pieces into the kingdom. Let none be lost. Bring all the outcasts, the outmatched, the outnumbered, the outplayed, the outsiders, the friendless, the forgotten, the faulted, the left outs, the left behinds, the left fields, the leftovers. Let none be lost. So I end here by admitting I am a basket case. We all are. In way, mind, body, spirit, some way. We are all basket cases. But I have put all my eggs in one basket, the Easter basket of a risen, rising, reigning, returning Lord. It's like a basket that collects all of the broken pieces, broken people, broken hearts, broken world. And after being blessed, is bestowed upon this world to bless it and to feed it. Because we are fed as we feed. Jesus is the bread of life. And we feast on him in our hearts with thanksgiving. And we are fed as we feed.